Okay, so we'll be covering two main types of supply side policies. One is market based and the other is interventionist supply side policy, and then you'll be able to see the difference very soon. There is an economic diagram here, which you will see on the next slide. If you are not familiar with it, don't worry too much about it, yeah, because you probably haven't learned it yet. If you're in year 12 or if you're just starting the economics course at school, or if you are just tuning in to learn some economics. Okay, so let's go. The supply side policies. What supply side policies do is that they try to increase the productive capacity of our economy. So if you remember last lesson or yesterday, hope you didn't forget what you learned yesterday, because it's just one day ago. But anyway, so if you remember last lesson, we've mentioned about what GDP is, right? So GDP is essentially just a measure of how productive an economy is, or how much the economy is producing in monetary terms. So if you're making 5 pieces of bread and each bread is worth $1, then your total GDP for your economy is $1 times 5 pieces of bread, which is $5, right? So $5. So what the supply side policy aims to do is that we try to increase the production of the economy so that we can produce more bread in the economy, and as a result we would achieve economic growth, because if we produce more things, there would be growth in the economy, as discussed yesterday. Okay, so as we can see, we've got this very confusing, maybe confusing to you, economic diagram here. So we've got AD, and then we've got RAS and all that stuff. So if you are not familiar with this, just try to think about it as RAS is what we call the long run aggregate supply curve, right? If RAS increases, or if this curve shifts to the right, it means that our real GDP here would be increasing. So we can see the real GDP is increasing from Y to YFE here, if the curve shifts from RAS to RAS1. So and also we would note that for the price level, it actually decreases. So what this means is when we produce more goods in the economy, there's a bigger supply of these goods and services. And as a result, it will be easier for consumers to obtain these goods and services, forcing the producers to sell at a lower price in the economy, such that they can sell most of their goods, since there's an increase in the number of goods circulating in the economy. So good thing to be aware of is that when a supply side policy is successful, it would shift the RAS to the right, which means an increase in the amount of goods and services we produce in the economy, and also it would reduce the level of the price level in the economy, which means a disinflation in most cases, so a reduce in the level of inflation in the economy. Okay, cool. So this is kind of how we hope the policy would achieve to increase GDP and cause economic growth. Yeah. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the policy. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I guess we've got just a quick example here, and we want to understand why this is important to us, right? So for the UK, our productivity level is actually quite weak, and of course that isn't good for us, because if we are not as productive as other countries, that means we aren't as competitive, and it also means that the cost of producing these goods and services for us would be higher. So if for British workers we can only produce the same amount of goods as a German worker in 5 days compared to 4, which is what we're talking about here, it means that we aren't kind of achieving our potential, and our economy won't be growing as fast because we aren't as productive. Yeah. So it would just be important to kind of aware of this current situation that the UK is facing. So of course it's important to find out why. So a lot of economists, we study the subject in order to figure out these problems and how to solve them, right? So why is the UK suffering from such a productivity crisis? So in general, we kind of look at two main factors as economists. Oh, thanks for following, DXL. So in general, we kind of look at two main factors as economists. So one is the demand side of the economy, and then the other, of course, is the supply side of the economy. So we can see that from this LSE blog here. So they're discussing that there should be two main categories of explanations for this productivity slowdown. So one is a supply side factor. So this means a mismatch of skills between the workers in the UK versus what is desired in the economy. So because of this mismatch of skills, that means we aren't using all of our workforce, and as a result, we potentially would be less productive in terms of our factors of production with regards to labor. Yeah. So, and another category here would be on the demand side, of course. So if there aren't as much demand in the economy, this means that there won't be as much investment to improve the economy. And as a result, if we don't improve our factors of production, in this case, our workforce, if we don't train them, or if we don't improve the capital and the technology that our companies are using, because of weak investment on the demand side of the economy, we won't be growing as fast in terms of productivity. Okay, I see there's a question here. So is it better to use the Keynesian AS curve or the new classical SRAS or RAS curve to represent an increase or a successful implementation of the supply side policy? So I would say in general, I would tend to advise students to use the Keynesian AS curve. So the Keynesian would be, if we go back here, so the Keynesian would be this one, right? It's kind of like the slightly curvy one. And the reason being is I like the Keynesian because if you have the AD curve here, you can quickly reflect the change in the price level of the economy. Whereas for the classical LRAS, you can still do the same, but then it's hard to show how close you are at the full capacity, if that makes sense. So for the Keynesian, you can see that when the LRAS shifts to the right, we are kind of getting further away from the full capacity to a sense. So we can see that the distance here is kind of like slightly bigger compared to this and here. So let me just kind of like draw that out. The full capacity for this RAS curve would be at this point, right? So we're kind of like closer to full capacity compared to this curve, which is further from full capacity if the demand doesn't change. So yeah, I think in general it's just less confusing to use the Keynesian one. Okay, so if we go back here, so in general we can see in this particular post, for the UK's productivity crisis, most of the economists in this particular event or panel propose investments in human capital, so like retraining and education, basically as a type of supply side policy in order to help solve the UK's productivity crisis. Yeah. Okay, so there are kind of one big focus of supply side policies is to improve the factors of production, as we discussed. And what are the factors of production? So just a quick refresher. Factors of production, we've got land, labor, capital, and enterprise. So land is just basically any natural resources that we have. So like crops or like wheat, things like that, which we can use to make pizza. And labor is just our workforce, right? So if we educate them and we train them, then we'll be improving labor. Or if we, for example, make our immigration policy more relaxed, then there would be more people coming to work in the UK, and as a result, we would increase the size of the labor force. Capital is, you can think of it as machinery or technology that can help us produce things more efficiently. So an oven, if you're running a bakery, if you've got more impressive ovens or faster ovens, you'll be able to bake more bread easier. And again, if we invest in oven technology, then we'll be able to produce more as an economy. And then finally, enterprise. So enterprise is kind of like how the entrepreneurs or business owners in the country acts in order to organize these different factors of production into an actual business that helps to produce something. So what I mean by that is, and how we can improve enterprise is by, for example, if we educate entrepreneurs or if we provide grants to start up businesses, then as a result, we'll be kind of improving the amount of entrepreneurship in the country. And of course, this would help increase the overall levels of production in the economy, therefore increasing the total amount of supply for goods and services. Okay, so any questions, again, you can just like fire away in the chat. So stop me if it gets confusing, because I'm not sure if you guys are in year 12 or year 13 or if you are just tuning in general. Okay, so interventionist supply side policy. So this is one of like the main branches of supply side policy. So it's called interventionist because like the government is kind of spending money directly to intervene in the economy. So in particular, there are three kind of ways that the government can do interventionist supply side policy. So the first one is basically to invest in the economy in its infrastructure. The second one would be invest in its labor, and the third one would be invest in its technology. So this pretty much comes down to the factors of production again, right? Because infrastructure, we're looking at improving capital in the economy, especially public capital. So like we're talking about roads and also other types of public capital like internet or Wi-Fi or electricity. So all of that would be included in infrastructure, as we'll see a little bit later. Labor as well. So labor is pretty much if the government invests in apprenticeship schemes, or if they spend more money on education, then it would be an investment in labor. And then technology, again, then investment grants. So we'll just move forward from there. So types of infrastructure. So it's important to understand that infrastructure does not just involve roads or highways or airport runways, in this case Heathrow. So infrastructure is a much more broader term in economics, because it would also include things like electricity. So you can see all of these different symbols, although there are some duplicated symbols here. So there's like light bulbs, fans, electricity, water as well, energy. So all of these would be regarded as infrastructure, because these infrastructures are fundamental systems of facilities that can help an economy function. And they tend to be publicly owned and is a type of capital, because they help us produce more goods and services. So, for example, if you're why do I keep thinking that we are a bakery? But so, for example, if we're a bakery And if we don't have fresh water supply, then it will be very difficult to bake bread, right? So it is these different types of infrastructure that the government can help to invest in that helps to enable businesses to produce different types of goods and services. And without these types of infrastructure, say if you're in less developed countries or if you're in a very remote place like like Easter Island or whatever, or Christmas Island, then that would be quite problematic, because we won't be able for businesses to come into the country to produce goods and services, and of course that would be quite bad for our economic growth. So investing in infrastructure is important and is a type of interventionist supply side policy. So if you're in the UK right now, I'm sure you've heard of what we call the Elizabeth line. So we've got the Elizabeth line here, very lovely. Apart from the problem that most of it still isn't open yet. So in general, better infrastructure can be achieved by building new railways and transportation, which is a very popular way to do so. So if our transport networks are better, this would help to reduce the time cost of traveling between different places. And as a result, it should help make our businesses more productive and more efficient. So, and similarly, if you are, say, a business in a certain industry, like the logistics companies, so for example, DHL, because one of our viewers got DHL now, reminds me of DHL, it will be able to help reduce your transport costs of moving your parcels from one place to another if you reduce the transportation time. So for example, if you are a delivery man working for DHL and you need to drive these parcels down from Manchester to London, for example, it will be much faster if there's a highway in between, right? Like the HS2, which is, again, not built yet, with lots of delays. So yeah, if you invest in infrastructure, it would certainly help with productivity and reducing the cost of production for the economy, so that we would be producing more goods and services. So you can kind of see the public benefit of the Elizabeth line, helping 1.5 million people to transport faster. And I think that's quite a big deal. But then, of course, there are always problems or obstacles in this case. So the Crosswell or the Elizabeth line has been delayed so many times that nobody believes the real date of when it would be open anymore. So you can see on the BBC News website in 2018 December, we need to pay 1.4 billion more for the taxpayers, and it's delayed until 2019. And then in 2019 it's delayed until 2021, and now in 2020 it's delayed until 2022. So I guess that's kind of like a question that we should ask ourselves, how efficient our government is. So not trying to get political here, but governments in economics often face government failure as well, because there's usually like a lack of information, right? Which is a problem with supply side policies. So we might have expected the cost to be several $billion, but then suddenly it's costing us a lot more. So these are just some of the problems when we invest in infrastructure, or even in general for government spending. So some students might kind of be slightly confused, because some of these policies might also actually increase demand in the economy. And what I mean by that is because, say, when you build a new runway or a new road, you would be increasing the demand for concrete, for example, or the demand for raw materials and the demand for labor in order to build those new roads. So as a result, some of these supply side policies might actually help to increase AD, at least initially, in the short run. Yeah, because the government is actually spending money in the economy, right? So, and eventually, after like a few years, it would help to increase AS. in particular the LRAS in this case. Yeah, so LRAS. So just kind of keep that in mind. There might be like an impact on both the demand side and the supply side for interventionist supply side policy. And in this case, HS2 rail project has increased the demand of labor by 22,000 jobs, which is always good for the economy, especially during this time of the coronavirus. And we can see all of this investment is always going on in the background. So more investment for national rail, more investment in all of these footbridges and all of that stuff. Okay, so infrastructure is a big part in interventionist supply side policy. And now let's talk about technology. So technology is important, and how the government does this is through this organization called Innovate UK. So currently we are trying to pay some grants in order to help improve the technologies to reduce the impact of coronavirus. So this might mean socially distanced offices or socially distanced desks. I'm not too sure what type of technologies will come out of this, but I'm hoping it might be something cool. Maybe like a new type of refrigerator or something like that, or a new type of mask, or some technology that prevents us from shaking hands. I don't know. But in general, if we invest in better technology, and in this case coronavirus technology, we should be able to help people get to work better, or at least make them work in a more efficient way, hopefully, after the crisis. And of course, this would help to produce more goods and increase output. So if we put the current crisis aside, even in general, if we improve the technology for factories, or technologies for firms in particular, in this day and age of the internet and the digital age, we should help improve the productivity in the economy, and as a result it might potentially spark further innovation and increase economic growth, because we'll be able to produce more with that technology. And then finally, the last main branch of interventionist supply side policy would be about the investment in human capital. So an increase in human capital, what types of things are we looking at? I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the new T levels. Yeah, so the T levels is, I think it's just starting this year, and supposedly the government is spending a lot of money on this. It's kind of like an alternative to in between the apprenticeship schemes that we currently have and like the more academic BTEC and like sixth form A levels. Yeah. So supposedly you would have kind of like some work experience, like on the job experience of 45 days. And also you kind of study the technical aspects of that particular industry. So for example, some of the industries might be like digital, I believe, and then another would be like health or care or healthcare, things like that. So this is kind of something that the government is trying to do to help fix the mismatch of skills in the economy compared to the demand for labor. So I guess a lot of graduates at the moment are unemployed, not just because of the coronavirus, but also because the economy does not need that particular type of academic skill. Yeah. So hopefully this should help improve the education and the training of our labor force, and as a result increase our productive capacity and utilize more workers that aren't currently in work when they graduate. So if we fix the mismatch between the skills and what is demanded in the economy, effectively we will be reducing what we call occupational immobility. Yeah? So that our workers would be able to change their jobs and find the right one for them quicker and better. And as a result, it should help increase economic growth and employment. Okay, So, and of course, there are criticisms for T levels as well, which which you can look up if you are interested in abandoning your A levels and switching to T levels. Okay, so that's mainly it for interventionist supply side policy. And now let's look at market-based supply side policy. So market-based supply side policy is pretty much the government trying to make the market more efficient. And they can do this by reducing their involvement in the market or trying to provide incentives for the market in some way. So there's kind of like quite a few examples moving onwards. So for example, if we reduce income tax, supposedly, in theory, people would be more incentivized to work because they'll be earning more money, since they will be keeping more of their money by paying less taxes. And as a result, there should be a bigger supply of labor in the economy, and this means a bigger labor force and increasing factors of production, and it will increase our GDP output, right? So we'll be able to produce more goods and services, and our AS will shift to the right, or at least AS will shift to the right. But does this always happen in the economy? It's hard to say, yeah, because you might decide not to work as hard if you're earning more money. So it kind of depends on your personal situation. But of course, there needs to be more studies done to kind of show whether this particular economy would benefit from that policy. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard of a lot of strikes or tube strikes. I'm not sure what you call these, air strikes and British Airways strikes, air strikes, and then we also have civil servant strikes. So if the government tackles the power of labor unions like they did before the 2000s, this should help improve economic efficiency, and this would help us our economy to produce more goods. Because if you think about it, if we just reduce the amount of tube strikes each year that we have and help make transportation more efficient, then we should be able to produce goods that are of a lot more value, hopefully. And we'll get to work quicker. We won't need to switch to the other tube lines like 4 or 5 times or whatever in order to avoid the strike. So we should be able to produce things in a more efficient manner. However, I'm not saying that these strikes are necessary. So these strikes are important to protect our workers, right? Because in general, for example, if we look at the TfL, they are the only employer of tube staff or tube drivers. That's why the workers kind of need to band together to have a bigger bargaining power against the companies that they are being employed for, since they don't have the power to switch between other jobs in the same industry. So it's important for labor unions to kind of protect their workers. And it is exactly because the labor union protects their workers that it would create inefficiency. So, for example, if we look at this example, unions say staff are being disposed as cheaply as quickly as possible because currently there's no demand for airlines, right, and airways. But according to the free market, this is the right thing to do, and this is the right thing that should happen, right? So this in general would be an indicator of economic efficiency if the union isn't there, or if the power of unions would actually decrease in their country. So if more people can easily be fired and hired, then this should improve the efficiency of our labor market, and as a result, it would help firms to kind of keep their costs down in terms of like the wages of their workers, and potentially it will also help to produce more goods and services because they are paying less of a cost to produce them. Yeah. So this is just one of the ways, again, for the government to improve the economy and achieve economic growth through a market-based supply side policy. Another way would be what we call incentive-related policies. So, for example, reducing income tax, like we discussed previously, should increase the amount of work or the amount of hours people put into work, because they'll be earning more money, and as a result, it should help reduce the cost or the wages in the economy, and therefore it would help the economy produce more. But then there are other ways to incentivize the economy through businesses. So instead of reducing income tax, which is basically what we pay the government if we go to work, we can also reduce corporation tax. So this means business tax. Yeah. So if we reduce business tax, again, this should help increase the level of investment in the economy and help businesses produce more goods and services, because they're keeping more of their profits. And as a result, this would again increase the size of our economy. So that should help potentially, assuming the businesses don't try to evade tax, or the businesses don't try to just keep the profits instead of increase their production and investment. Yeah. Which sometimes they would do. So that's incentive-related policies. So we can see this comic here. I love these editorial or political cartoons. If we cut taxes, there might be a problem with the level of income equality in the economy. So there might be a bigger wealth gap, right? So if we cut taxes by like 10%, for example, those that are in the middle income class might be able to buy one more McDonald's meal, but those that are slightly richer might be able to buy the McDonald's company. So that's just something we can be aware of, another problem. And then finally, we've got, not finally, but another one that we have is particular investment grants for companies and things that are regional. So we've got the Dorset SME recovery grants that aims to help local governments or local area of Dorset recover from coronavirus. And as a result, again, this would help promote growth in these industries or regions that would require some help from the government to increase the number of businesses in that area, and as a result, increase production and RAS in the economy. Okay. So we think a lot about protecting key workers and trying to cheer them up, right? But then, so this kind of links to the inequality problem that we have. But actually, how much are we remunerating them, and how much are we actually rewarding them for the work that they do? So we can see that for key workers like teachers, nurses, and all of that, they're actually earning below the median income in the economy. So for the median income, we can think of it as the amount that most people would earn, like on average in the economy. It's slightly different than the average, but it's kind of like a good indicator to show what is the common amount that people earn. So in general, we can see that median income in the UK is around like 30 grand a year, but all of these different professions are actually earning less than that. So like teachers, nurses. So it's actually quite difficult if we aren't actually remunerating these professionals well, then how do we expect them to do good work? And are we really appreciative of them as a society? So it's important, again, for labor unions to come into play here to kind of protect these different types of professions, since they are like one major employer for them, and they need to increase their bargaining power with these employers so that they can negotiate higher wages. So for nurses, it would be like the NHS, and like for teachers, it would be like, of course, the Department of Education and the government, right? Okay. So policies encouraging free market competition would be another market-based supply-side policy. So actually how easy it is to start up a business in a country is important in the economy. So if the easier it is for you to start up a business, then the easier it is, the more likely that entrepreneurs would increase the amount of investment to establish new businesses and also to increase the amount of production in your economy, right? So finally, we've got kind of like something good for the UK. So the UK is around like the ease of doing business rank is at what level 8 out of the world. So that's actually top 10, right? That's quite good. So maybe I should have included all the other countries and then we could have compared it. But you can see it's much easier to do business in other places still, like Singapore or Hong Kong. And the taxes in Singapore and in Hong Kong is much lower as well. So just something to keep in mind when international businesses decide to invest and decide where to invest, they would consider all of these different factors. So the easier it is for you to do business, the more likely that international businesses will invest in your country and potentially build factories or shops or offices there, and as a result it would increase our GDP, right? So, and this ranking kind of looks at quite a few factors, like how easy it is to start a business or deal with construction permits and things like that. So if the government can deregulate or reduce the amount or number of barriers to start a business, or reduce the number of barriers to get these permits, then it should help make doing business easier, and it should help increase the level of investment in the economy and boost the level of GDP in the economy. Yeah. So another common term for this is called red tape. So this kind of showed up in a past paper before. So the red tape just stands for it's another word for these barriers in the economy that kind of prevents the ease of doing business. So if you see an article saying that the government is reducing or cutting these red tape, then it means that the government is deregulating. Okay. And then we've got privatization. I think this is the final one for market-based supply-side policy. So what privatization means is that the government is selling off something that they own, or a state-owned company that they have. So in general, economists would regard the private sector as being more efficient compared to the public sector, because private firms would aim to maximize their profits, whereas public companies might have different objectives, which would cause their cost of production or their operational cost to be higher than the private companies. So the private companies in general would always have an incentive to keep their costs low and hence be more efficient. So that's why if the government tries to sell off some of these public enterprises, it should help increase the level of efficiency in the country, and again it would help reduce costs and increase the amount of production and the amount of goods and services we have in the economy. So these are just some of the ways that the government can encourage the amount of competition in the free markets. So if you sell off the public company, then there would be more private firms as well, and they would kind of compete with each other, and it would be and again it would be like an incentive for them to keep costs and prices low. Okay, so here we see some of like the examples that the Margaret Thatcher in like the 1970s, 60s that she sold, which used to be government enterprises. So you can see a lot of these start with the word British, right? So British Petroleum, British Gas, British Airways. So quite all of these used to be government enterprises. If you would like, you can take a quick guess as to which one Margaret Thatcher didn't sell. So Margaret Thatcher was a prime minister of the UK, if you haven't heard of her. Maybe because you guys are too young to know. But yeah, so I'll give you 5 seconds. You can pop it into the chat to guess which enterprise that she didn't sell, or you can just keep the answer close to your chest. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to reveal the answer. Yeah, what Margaret Thatcher didn't sell is the BBC. Yeah. Oh, good job. DXL, you got it. So the BBC is still state-owned. Yeah. So it's operating and being paid by the government to operate. Whereas BP is now publicly owned, I believe. Rolls-Royce and all of these, you can like trade stocks and shares. And so all of these aren't owned by the UK government anymore. Okay. Next. Now let's dive into some of the supply side policy problems. Yeah. So a lot of these we've kind of touched upon when we looked at the different types of supply side policy. So these are kind of like really good for your analysis and evaluation points when you're in the exam and you're doing an essay on supply side policy for A-level and IB. So first problem, time lag. This is a very common evaluation point, but it's solid in this case, because in general, if the government is paying a lot of money in order to invest in education, infrastructure, and all of that stuff, it takes time and it takes years. As we've seen in the Crossrail or Elizabeth Line example, there were delays after delays and after delays. So it kind of takes like, 5-10 years just to build a new highway or like build a new railway. So similarly, it takes years for education and training. So when T levels are gradually kind of showing up or like being implemented, and again, that takes years for institutions and organizations to kind of perfect and polish the course and for the course to be accepted by employers. So it would take some time for them to actually have an effect on the total level of production on the economy and total level of aggregate supply in the economy. Effects on equity. So equity, we can just think of it as the distribution of income. So if we cut taxes, especially income taxes, for the wealthy in particular, that would be problematic in terms of the distribution of income. So there would be a bigger wealth gap. Especially a 5% cut would benefit those that are in the top 10% income bracket a lot more. So they would kind of gain more for their buck. And also, if we reduce welfare support and things like that, this would affect households that are disadvantaged or those that are relatively poorer, right? So in general, supply side policy would have problems in terms of the distribution of income. Exploitation of workers. So if we curb the power of trade unions and make the labor market more efficient, this might potentially be detrimental to workers because, as we previously discussed, the workers won't be able to kind of band together and increase their bargaining power against their employers to increase their wages. So if we tackle these labor unions, even though it would make the market more efficient, it might actually be quite bad for worker protection, and as a result, it would again be bad in terms of the fairness to the workers. And then finally, it would reduce the amount of the government budget, right? So whenever the government spends money, there would be an opportunity cost for the government, and that money could have been spent elsewhere, which might be more effective. So in general, any type of investment for interventionist supply side policies would incur a cost on the government. So again, this is kind of like an evaluation point that we can use in exams. So looking back at the income equality problem and distribution of income, so we can see when Margaret Thatcher, so she was a big fan of supply side policies, and she did a lot of reduction of the power of labor unions, and she sold a lot of public enterprises. So you can see the level of inequality has increased significantly during her time as Prime Minister. So this is the Gini coefficient. It is a good indicator of the level of kind of like the wealth gap in the economy, if you're familiar with it, which you should be if you're taking the autumn A-level exams. So yeah, you can see that there's a huge spike in inequality here. But if we look at the same period, like 1980s and 1990, so I was wrong on 1960s, 1980 to 1990. So, and we look at the level of UK economic growth, like 1980s, so somewhere like here, here to 1990, so like here. So we can see that there is like positive economic growth at this period, but it's not like, wow, oh my god, like 10% or whatever, right? So it's actually quite hard to evaluate how effective a policy is, even in hindsight, because there's just so many different factors that plays into economic growth, because there are also demand side factors, but not just supply side factors. And you can see that like in 1990s to 2000s, we've kind of achieved like the same level of economic growth without sacrificing the level of inequality, right? So, but we may be able to explain this level of economic growth through technology or innovation, because of the invention of the internet and the use of the internet throughout this period. So it's kind of difficult to compare this, but one thing is for sure, the level of inequality has increased during Margaret Thatcher's reign, we can say. Okay. So now let's look at some advantages of supply side policies. So one advantage here is that there's an increase in GDP with a limited trade-off. Because in general, if you're familiar with demand side policies, which we will be talking about in 2 weeks' time, demand side policies would tend to increase inflation, whereas supply side policies are relatively disinflationary. Again, this would be due to demand side policies would essentially mean that there would be more demand for the amount of goods and services we have circulating in the economy, and as a result, people would be willing to pay more for them, hence increasing inflation. Whereas for supply side policy, it's the other way around. If we have more goods and services in the economy, people would actually be able to pay less to acquire those goods and services. Secondly, reduces national unemployment rate. So if supply side policy is successfully implemented, for example, the T-levels, and it would help improve the reduce the level of mismatch between the labor skills and the skills that's demanded in the economy. This would help decrease the level of unemployment, right? And in particular, the level of structural unemployment. So structural unemployment is basically means that if you are unemployed because you don't have the right skills in the economy. So this would help reduce the unemployment rate in the economy in the long run, which is what we call the natural unemployment rate. Improves international competitiveness and current account. So if we have better infrastructure and if we have like better labor training, we should help reduce the cost of production. And if the cost of production of our economy reduces, this means that we're more competitive internationally, because we can price our products lower and compete in terms of prices when we export our goods internationally to other countries. And because if we're more competitive, it would help with the current account. Yeah. So we'll be able to export more in terms of monetary value and goods and services compared to the amount that we import. And then finally, it's got a long-term solution or impact. Yeah. So supply-side policies tend to have like a long-term effect despite they have a time lag. So it's kind of like helpful in addressing these structural issues in the economy compared to demand-side policies, which might be more short-term. So for example, if the government just aims to reduce interest rates or aims to increase the amount of spending in the economy to stimulate it, those policies might be more short-term compared to supply-side policies. Okay, so when do we want to use supply-side policies? Or when should we use supply-side policies? So these are just some of the things that we should keep in mind, right? So if the government budget is relatively healthy and we're not spending that much that year, or we don't have as much national debt, which is not the case in the UK because we're now like $2 trillion and £2 trillion in debt because of the coronavirus, then perhaps we might not want to use supply-side policy. But we can also argue it the other way around, because if the economy is in a recession, perhaps we want to do more supply-side policy because of the initial investment. Yeah. So this national debt would be what we should be considering. Oh, thanks for following Heisenberg 2020 or Heisenberg 2020. That's a good name. Okay, so this would be one issue here. And then another thing here is the distribution of income and equity. Yeah? So if the economy is relatively well placed in terms of the wealth gap, so if the income levels are quite similar across the middle income class and the upper income class, then there might be some room to do more supply side policy, even though if it might cause a disadvantage in income. Yeah. And then time frame, so how long or when we want to increase the economic growth of the economy. So if we want to improve or stimulate the economy in the short term, we probably don't want supply side policy because it might take years to invest in education, training, and infrastructure and all of that. Yeah. Whereas if we want a longer time frame, then, or we have a longer time frame, then we would want to do a supply side policy. Okay, I see a quick question. Hi, is this some online class going on or just for Twitch stream? Yes, so there's like an ongoing class. So we've got confirmed dates for September currently. We are live every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. So mainly to help students kind of refresh their learning and also to help them for their autumn A-level exams. But if you're interested in economics in general, do try to tune in. I try to keep things very simple so that you can improve your knowledge of the economy and understand what the heck is happening and what the government is doing to our economy, whether they're killing it or they're improving it. Yeah. Yeah. So I should send the link to the schedule in the Twitch channel, and I shall update it. But if you go on our website, which is curious.com, yeah, then you'll be able to find the class schedule there on the page with regards to the free A-level and IB classes. Okay, so curious, Q-U-R-O-E-S. Okay, so finally, the last point about supply side policy. When do we want to do it? Is the level of market failure that we have in the economy. So if the level of market failure or the level of efficiency is very, very high in the economy, then, and it is a structural problem, then potentially we would want to do a supply side policy rather than a demand side policy. So if the labor unions are very strong and they are making firms impossible to operate or impossible to fire people, then of course we would need supply side policy. Or if there's like so much labor regulation or legislation, or if the concentration of power for businesses is very, very high, such that there are a lot of monopolies in the economy, then we should try to improve the level of competition in the economy by tackling these monopolies like Amazon, Google. Yes, I'm talking about big tech, and we should tackle these monopolies in order to help make the economy more efficient. Okay, I shouldn't diss on Amazon on Twitch stream because they own Twitch. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of analyzing supply side policies.